Hey guys, Nuke here once again, and I'm going to be doing another update on my Lair of Darkness Fang of Critias deck profile. I do know that in the last video I said that was going to be my last update for it, but I ended up finding some new cards to go in this deck, and I really wanted to show you guys this. So let's go right ahead and get into it. We've got the standard, 2 Darkest Diabolos, Lord of the Lair, just a great 3000 beater, plain and simple. His tribute effect of being able to be summoned when a dark monster is tributed while it's in the hand or in the graveyard is just absolutely fantastic. Gives you a really nice rank 8 to go with. I do only run 2 because drawing into him can be a little tricky sometimes, and you don't really have too many monster searchers in this deck just because of how kind of aggro it tends to be. So you really just want the 2. You want to be able to send him to grave really fast with things like Armageddon Knight and Foolish Burial. So yeah, really nice for that. Next up, we have, in my opinion, the best monster in this deck, Lilith, Lady of Lament. She searches any normal trap, essentially. You reveal 3 normal traps, and your opponent randomly selects one for you to set. This is, like I said, this is a quick effect. Like I mentioned in my last video, using Lair of Darkness, you're just going to be popping your opponent's monsters constantly. Big tip for this deck, I would personally never tribute my own monsters unless I'm trying to summon Diabolos, frankly. I mean, searching any normal trap in the deck, I made sure this time around that every single trap in this deck is a normal trap. So any trap card in this deck, you'll be able to search out with her. It's fantastic. Next up, we've got Arma the Wicked Warden. This acts as a terraforming and as draw power. You can discard it to add a Lair of Darkness to hand, or you contribute a dark monster, including itself, to draw a card. Pretty simple card, really. It's got a decent 1700 body to it, so if you need to attack with it, it's more than serviceable, I suppose. Next up, we have Armageddon Knight. Armageddon Knight is very nice in this deck. I do only run 2 of them, just because he does have a bit of a lower attack, and a lot of the times he just ends up being tribute fodder after his effect goes off. When he's summoned, you can send a dark monster from deck to grave. That's any monster in the deck except for the Lava Golem that I mentioned in the last video. So yeah, you send your Diabolos, or you can send a Destrudo the Lost Dragon's Fission, which you can go into like Black Rose Dragon plays. Great way to like nuke the field if you really need to get rid of some of those trickier boards. Next up, we have Tour Guide to the Underworld. Obviously, she's only limited to 1, so you can only run 1 in this deck. Really powerful, though. When she's summoned, you can special summon a level 3 Fiend-type monster from your hand or deck, but its effects are negated. However, if you summon a monster like Lilith, which is normally what you're going to be going for, actually, it's the only target you can go for in this deck. Her effects are negated, but she can still tribute. In fact, Skill Drain is actually not very effective against this deck because all of the monsters that tribute dark monsters tribute them as cost, which means even if their effects are negated, they do still have to pay cost to activate their effects. So cards like Lilith, Diabolos, and Arima, their effects don't resolve, but you do still have to tribute. So if you have Lair of Darkness on the field, you can still pop your opponent's monsters essentially for free without attacking, which is a really nice strategy to go for in this deck. Next, we have Skarn, Malabranch of the Burning Abyss. A lot of the times, like say you open this and no other good monsters in your opening hand, what I like to do is just kind of set him. He's got a nice beefy 2000 defense, so a lot of first turn attacks, especially if you just set this and set a trap, for example. A lot of people aren't going to go too aggro on you unless they're really trying to. And the nice 2000 defense is a nice, good defense for a first turn. And if it's in the graveyard during the end phase, because it was sent there this turn, you can search for a level 3 Fiend-type monster from your deck and add it to your hand. That's basically Tour Guide and Lilith. So it's a nice searcher. It does activate during the end phase. I wish it was a little faster, but it's what you got to deal with, and it's not bad, if I do say so myself. Next up, we have Destroy the Lost Dragon's Fission, as I mentioned earlier. So the way this card works is you target a level 4 or lower monster that you control, and you pay half of your life points to special summon this monster, and its level decreases by the level of the targeted monster. A lot of the times I'll do this with Armageddon Knight. I'll summon Armageddon Knight and I will send Destrudo to the grave. Then I'll pay half my life points and target Armageddon Knight. That turns Destrudo into a level 3 monster with 3000 defense. And that's good enough to synchro into Black Rose Dragon, as it is a tuner, as you can see right there. You don't really use him for much else other than synchro plays. Paying half your life points is a bit costly, so I wouldn't suggest just special summoning him just for his beefy defense. But if you are trying to go into something like Black Rose Dragon or Beals, which I believe are the only 2 synchros in this deck, then he's a great option, and he's your only tuner in the deck, so he works well for what he does. Next up we have a Lava Golem. Lava Golem is very, very nice in this deck, as well as Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode. I simply just don't have them. They're really hard to find, at least where I go to like find cards and play and all that stuff. But the way Lava Golem works, I'm sure you guys all know, it's a classic monster. You tribute 2 of your opponent's monsters and you give them this. How I like to work this is I will have a Lair of Darkness and a Lilith, Lady of Lament, or really any monster that contribute. Or really just a card that contribute, Lava Golem specifically. I'll give them the Lava Golem, and I'll wait until their standby phase. They'll take the 1000 damage, and then what I like to do is, on their next move that you can respond to, I like to just tribute the Lava Golem. If you have Lair of Darkness out on the field, which to do this you do have to do, you will get 2 tokens at the end phase because you gave them Lava Golem, because you tributed 2 monsters during your turn. And they take 1000 damage, lose 2 monsters, you get 2 tokens, and then you tribute their Lava Golem. I mean, it's really nice, especially when you have Lair of Darkness on the field already, because it forwards your board clearing plays, because this monster does not count towards the tribute that you get from Lair of Darkness's effect. So this or Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode are really nice additions to this deck, and I can't recommend them enough. Although I would only run 1 apiece because they do take more than 1 tribute, and sometimes if your opponent has just 1 or 2 monsters at a time on the field, it is going to be a pretty hefty dead draw. Next up we have Dark Arm Dragon, kind of a classic staple in dark decks. You summon it by having exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard, which is no problem at all, given that Diabolos comes out of the grave constantly. You're running both Monster Reborn and Soul Charge in this deck, so it's not a big deal to get him out. And when he is out, he is absolutely devastating. Because once he is out, and you're just dumping stuff to the graveyard, whether it be your own monsters, or just simply because your others are getting destroyed, he just gathers more ammo, and he's got a nice, good 2800 attack. There's a reason that he is limited, that is for sure. So that's actually it for the monsters in this deck for right now. Let's move on to the main field spell of the deck, which is, of course, Lair of Darkness. And yeah, you're going to want to run this at 3 for obvious reasons. It's the main card in this whole deck. It turns all monsters on the field into dark monsters, which I've noticed lately has actually been really nice. For example, in Blue Eyes decks, this prevents them from using cards like Honest. It prevents really any attribute-based type effects. If they require the monster on the field to be like a certain attribute, because it turns all of them into dark monsters. And of course, it allows you to tribute 1 of your opponent's monsters once per turn to activate an effect that would require a tribute as cost, as if you control it, even though you do not control it. And also at the end phase, the turn player. So if you tribute during your opponent's turn, your opponent actually gets the tokens at the end phase. And if you tribute during your turn, then you get the tokens. So always a nice factor to remember. I like to put dice as a counter on this just to remind myself of how many monsters I've tributed during that turn. They really come in handy, especially for like link plays and stuff like that. So good to keep track of those any way you can. Next up, of course, this is the Fang of Critias version. So you're going to want to run 3 Fang of Critias. This is a polymerization for the trap cards that we'll mention in the later part of this video. So yeah, it's kind of useless on its own, but with the trap cards it can be really powerful. A couple staples that we run in this deck. We run Regeki, of course, and we run a Twin Twisters. These are just basic removal cards. I would only run one Twin Twisters, just because I do run 2 Heavy Storm Dusters in the side deck. And Regeki is Regeki, so yeah, of course you want to use that. Next up we have Foolish Burial. And Foolish Burial, of course, is just a great staple card in any deck that requires the graveyard, of course. You can send your Diabolos, your Destrudo, or if you've got something like a Monster Reborn or Soul Charge, just whatever you need, you know. So, yeah, just fairly simple. Kind of just forwards your plays. Next we have some Revival cards in Monster Reborn and Soul Charge, of course. Just really simple cards to just keep forwarding your plays, as I mentioned earlier, so nothing more to say about those. This is a new card to the deck, Ultra Polymerization. I would run Super Polymerization, but I do have an Ultra, so, you know, might as well. This card is very interesting. You pay 2,000 life points and fusion summon a monster using 2 monsters that you control. And you can banish this card from your graveyard and target a fusion monster that you summoned with this card, and you can summon both of the monsters used for its fusion summon. But their attack and defense becomes 0, and their effects are negated. Now, the reason why I'm running Ultra Polymerization as well instead of Super Polymerization is because of that second effect. Yes, they do become 0 attack and defense, but that gives you 2 extra link materials, and as you'll find later in the video, the links I have set up for this build are fairly powerful, and they're not bad to go into at all, so I would highly recommend using Ultra or Super Polymerization, although I do like Ultra for its Revival effect. Couple draw power cards. We run one Lair of Darkness and an Upstart Goblin. A lot of people like to run multiple Lair of Darknesses. I personally do not, and the reason for that is very simple. I do not like the cost with this card of banishing a dark monster. You have no way of getting that banished monster out, and given that a lot of the monsters are really important in this deck, you can really only afford to banish 1 per game, and Lair of Darkness gets the job done, but you do also have a pretty high probability, given there's so many spells and traps in this deck, that you are just going to have to send your whole hand to the graveyard, and nobody wants to do that. Upstart Goblin is a really good alternative, and I kind of wish it wasn't locked at 1, or I would run more than 1 of them, of course, but, well, that's just how it goes. And lastly, for the spells and traps, we have Monster Gate, which is a pretty essential card to this deck. It can really mean the difference between winning and losing, and I mean that both in the sense of against your opponent and against yourself. This card can really be hit or miss, but it's insanely powerful when it works and insanely costly when it doesn't. So you tribute a monster and you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you find a monster that could be normal summoned, and then you special summon it. That is every single monster in this deck except for Lava Golem and Dark Armed Dragon. Now, the downside to this is because you run so many spells and traps in this deck, you may end up milling off 10, 12, 15, even 20 cards before you find a monster that can be normal summoned, and that's just the risk you have to take with this card. It, as I mentioned, is insanely powerful when it goes off, and because it uses a tribute as cost effect, you can tribute one of your opponent's monsters to kick it off. So it's really good, but be mindful of that risk whenever you use it. 2 really powerful cards I like to use in this deck are Waking the Dragon. These cards can be insanely powerful in this deck. They are searchable by Lilith, as is every other trap in this deck that we will mention throughout the main deck. And, I mean, given you're running such a heavy spell and trap lineup, your opponent is going to be immensely tempted to pop your back row, and this is how you keep them honest with that. And you'll see I do have a lot of basic targets that a lot of people use with this card, and honestly, it's kind of a beast to deal with. It makes your opponent really nervous, and it can also forward your own plays since you are going to keep them honest with the spell and trap removal. Instead of terraforming, I actually run 2 Metaverse. This is essentially like running 8 copies of Lair of Darkness. You have the 3 with Arma, you have the 3 actual Lair of Darkness, and then you have 2 with Metaverse. Also, Metaverse, again, is searchable by Lilith, so if you really need to get to it and you just have a Lilith, you don't have an Arma or a Lair in your hand, you can always go ahead and search this. I do only run 2 of each Really important trap in this deck, mostly just because I like to keep my opponent on their toes. I like to, I'll kind of mention that play here in a minute. I assume a lot of you will actually understand that once I'm done with the main deck, but yeah. Next up we run 2 Crush Card Viruses. I got those nice 2 alternate artworks for you there. This is mostly just kind of used for the fusion related to Fang of Critias, although it is a very nice board clearer, especially against decks that use a lot of high attack monsters. This will really hurt them quite a bit. Now the downside, of course, is that they can send 3 other monsters with 1500 or more attack to the graveyard, but you know, sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad for your opponent. It really depends, and they have the option to do it, but the biggest downside is that they do not take any damage until the end of their next turn, or end of the next turn, I should say. So, it can have its downsides, but it can be really powerful when used correctly. And with the fusion, of course. Next up, we run 2 Mirror Force. This is used both for the Fang of Critias fusion as well as the it's Mirror Force, guys. I mean, come on, nobody really uses this anymore. It's not a very commonly used trap, so a lot of people will not see this coming. And yeah, it's just really nice to be able to use when you have it. It keeps you protected because you're gonna be tributing a lot. So, and lastly, for the last 2 traps, there's a couple more. Never mind. These are the last 2 for the Fang of Critias fusions, though. Ring of Destruction and Tyrant Wing. Ring of Destruction, I mean, I've won a game or 2 with it, but it's really not a card I would suggest using too much. Tyrant Wing can be used pretty well with something like Dark Armed Dragon or Diabolos or a lot of your extra deck cards, but again, I really just recommend using these for the Fang of Critias fusions, hence why I only run 1 apiece. They're not the best traps by themselves. We run 1 more Revival card in Back to the Front. Again, searchable by Lilith, and it brings back a monster in defense position, so keeps you safe. And lastly, for the main deck, we have 1 Eradicator Epidemic Virus, which is insanely powerful when used against the right decks. You tribute a dark monster with 2500 or more attack. Again, with Lair of Darkness, that could mean tributing your opponent's high-level monsters, or high attack monsters, I should say. And you call Spell or Trap. And for the next 3 turns, every time your opponent draws any cards that you called Spell or Trap, they have to discard them. Now this is drawing. So during their draw phase, if they use cards like Pot of Desires or Upstart Goblin or any draw cards like that, they do have to show you if it's a spell or trap, they gotta discard it. Searching is not drawing though, so if they do search spells and traps, those don't get destroyed. But yeah, that's it for the main deck. I'd like to speak on that Waking the Dragon combo. The big combo that I like to do is you search either 1 or 2 of the trap you actually need and Waking the Dragon. A lot of the times I will search 2 Mirror Force and Waking the Dragon, or 2 Waking the Dragon and a Mirror Force. This is to keep them honest about it. This is to keep them from destroying the spells and traps that I need, and it keeps them on their toes. It keeps them from essentially screwing themselves over, but they might end up screwing themselves over anyways. A lot of this deck is played in a mind gamey type of way. So, keep your opponent nervous, keep them guessing, and don't let them catch on to any kind of patterns that you have going on, which is a great way to do that. So let's move on to the extra deck now. We'll go through the Fang of Critias fusions fairly quickly. We have Doom Virus Dragon. When it's summoned for the next 3 turns, all monsters your opponent draws for the next 3 turns that have 1500 or more attack are destroyed. Even if this card is destroyed, it's when it's summoned. So it's just kind of an inherent effect, even if it leaves the field. Really, really powerful when you pull this off. It can really screw over a lot of decks. One of my favorites to use. Mirror Force Dragon. If your opponent targets any monsters that you control with card effects or with attacks, you can wipe their whole board. It keeps them honest. It keeps them from having to kind of go crazy with card effects. It really kind of just limits it to non-targeting removal. So stuff like Regeki and all that, they really have to use powerful cards to get rid of it. So it kind of baits out a lot of the better cards that they have, really. Destruction Dragon. You can target a monster your opponent controls, target a card, sorry, that is Ring of Destruction that does that. You can target a card your opponent controls, destroy it, and if it was a monster, you inflict damage equal to their attack. The plus side of this from Ring of Destruction is Ring of Destruction makes you also take the damage, but you do not also take the damage with this one, only your opponent, and you can destroy any card rather than Ring of Destruction is only monsters. Tyrant Burst Dragon. He's a really powerful level 8 dragon, obviously. His effect is that he can attack all of your opponent's monsters once each, or you can equip him to another monster. That monster gains 400 attack and can make up to 3 attacks during each battle phase, which is extremely powerful when you attach him to things like Dark Arm Dragon or Diabolos. A new card that I've added to the extra deck, and the one that I use Ultra Polymerization for, is Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. For those of you who don't know what he does, when he's fusion summoned, you can have him gain attack equal to one of your opponent's monsters, and you can also copy the effects of another monster, and the name, is it also the attack and defense? No. It only replaces its name and its effect with the monster's original effects for that turn, which can be insanely powerful. This is why I actually don't run Phantom of Chaos in this deck, which actually came with the structure deck, because Phantom of Chaos has the caveat of your opponent does not take any damage with that card. But you can really pull off some mean combos with this. You can copy things like Trigate Wizard and cards like that. Trigate Wizard, Firewall Dragon, yeah, stuff like that. Really just kind of their most powerful monsters. Use them against them with Starving Venom Fusion. But a lot of you guys knew that. That card's been around for quite a while. Next we have Beals, the Diabolic Dragons. He can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and every time that you take damage involving him, then he gains that attack. Straight up. And since he can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, he can get quite beefy, and he's really a beast to deal with. He's a little harder to summon. However, since you do have access to Waking the Dragon, he is an option for that, as is really any extra deck monster in here, except for the Fang of Critias fusions, because they do have the caveat of they must be summoned with the Fang of Critias. Next up, we have the good old Black Rose Dragon, as I mentioned earlier. When he's synchro summoned, you can nuke the board. That's really all you use him for. Yeah, not really much else to him. Onto the Xyz, we have number 40, Gimmick Puppet of Strings. You can detach an Xyz material from him, and it puts a string counter on all monsters on the field except himself. And at the end of the next turn, all monsters that have string counters on them are destroyed, and your opponent inflicts 500, or you inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. So again, really good at clearing boards. There's really kind of a theme to this. It's really nukey, and it's really aggro in the sense that you're tributing off your opponent's monsters constantly. Next we have number 22, Zombie Stein. His effect is kind of meaningless, and it's actually kind of bad in this deck. The only reason you would really want to summon him is because he does have 4,500 attack. So if you really need to get over a monster with really high attack, he's there for you, and he does only take 2 level 8 monsters, which is every Fang of Critias fusion except for Doom Virus Dragon. Lava Golem and Diabolos also work with those as well, so he is not the worst option when it comes to beaters. Next for the Xyz monsters, we have Heretic Sun Dragon, Overlord of Heliopolis. He is by far one of the best cards in this deck. You can detach material from this card, in which case you would really want to use Diabolos, and I'll explain why in a minute. You detach Xyz material, and then you tribute any number of monsters on the field or your hand, and you can destroy that many cards on the field. Now, the combo that really works nicely with this deck is you can detach Diabolos from this card, and then tribute any number of monsters on the field. Assuming all of your monsters are dark, or you have Lair of Darkness on the field, in which case you can tribute one of your opponent's monsters with this card, you can actually summon Diabolos from the grave after detaching him if you haven't already done so this turn, which is really helpful because he already has 3,000 attack, and it gets a Diabolos right back on the field, as well as destroying potentially your opponent's entire field, given that it doesn't get negated or anything like that. This card can be insanely powerful when used in the right situation, and out of all of the cards in this extra deck, I would suggest any Lair of Darkness build should really stick to him. This next card is purely a Waking the Dragon target, Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon. He is unaffected by all other cards' effects. Period. He can't be affected by any cards' effects, no Raigeki, no Skill Drain, unless Skill Drain's already on the field, no Evenly Matched, nothing. You have to Kaiju him or beat over him. That's the only way you can beat him. A lot of people will scoop the second you bring him out. Next up for the links, we have a Topologic Bomber Dragon. This is another Waking the Dragon target, as well as a linked target for, say, like Ultra Polymerization, as well as the tokens spawned by Lair of Darkness. Actually, no, cross that, because it takes effect monsters. My bad, guys. But yeah, it's very, very nice. It's fairly simple. It's just a nuke card, and it's got 3,000 attack to boot, so what else could you ask for? Next up, we run 2 Nightmare cards. We run Cerberus and Phoenix. Spell and Trap removal, Special Summon removal. Pretty simple. What else do you need from that? And lastly, from the extra deck, we run 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice. Basically, Mrs. Radiant for dark monsters. So, yeah, it's fairly simple. Really nice, though. I like that card a lot. And it does only take 2 dark monsters, so you can't actually use tokens with that. So really nice. Now for the side deck, this is purely just the way that I like to build this and the way that like my locals are set up. So feel free to kind of tweak this as much as you like to your locals and the decks that you play against. This is just what I think that I need. So first off, we run 2 Swift Scarecrows. You're going to be tributing off a lot, and if you don't have a Lair of Darkness, you're kind of forced to tribute your own monsters. So it's good to have a couple Swift Scarecrows on the side, just in case your opponent is really kind of swinging into you a little too much for your liking. It really kind of stops that and keeps you from basically just flat out losing. Really nice card in this deck is actually Eater of Millions. So you do have to banish quite a lot from your extra deck, but given that the extra deck isn't entirely needed, except for the Fang of Critias fusions, it's not the worst thing to summon an Eater of Millions, and plus it does banish monsters face down, which is always really nice to be able to do in this deck, and he is already a dark type, so again, just really good. Next up, we run Vanity's Fiend. Vanity's Fiend, neither opponent can special summon monsters, flat out. Yeah, he's just good. He takes 2 tributes. No, just 1. He's a level 6, so he's not terrible. I do actually run a Phantom of Chaos in my side deck, just in case I really need it. If they summon something that's just absolutely insane, something like Blue Eyes Chaos Max, or, I mean, you know, you can kind of assume what you would need with this card. So, and again, already a dark type, and all that good stuff. Lastly, for the monsters in the side deck, I do run 1 Effect Veiler. This is the only hand trap really in the whole deck. You don't really need them too much. I mean, Ash can only do so much in this deck, and you can avoid a lot of it with certain cards. Lilith can't be ashed. Metaverse, I don't believe can be ashed because you can activate it rather than add it to your hand. So, Effect Veiler can be really nice in this deck. Just, you know, negating monsters' effects. There's that trouble monster every now and then that you want to take care of. We run 1 Shared Ride. A lot of people are going to be searching in this meta nowadays, so Shared Ride is always an excellent side deck card, in my opinion, regardless of what deck you're running. Yeah, I can't really recommend Shared Ride in a lot of decks enough. Next up, we run 2 Called by the Grave. I would run 3, but, I mean, for some reason, Konami decided that this card needed to be limited, so we can only run 2 in this deck. But Called by the Grave, wonderful card. Wonderful side deck card, especially in this deck. Next up, we run a Cosmic Cyclone. Spell and Trap removal, and it does banish the card. So again, I mean, and it's a quick play, so you can't really ask for better than that. It's really nice. We run a Scapegoat. Token spawns. You can use them for tribute fodder, like I usually do. And you can use them for links. If you have Lair of Darkness on the field, that's basically a free Wee Witch's Apprentice. So, yeah. Next up, we run 2 Heavy Storm Dusters, as I mentioned earlier. searchable by Lilith, of course, and you can destroy it to 2 spells and traps. Use it on your opponent's turn. You don't have to worry about the you cannot conduct your battle phase this turn effect, so yeah, simple. And lastly for these, oh no, not lastly, my bad. Forgot I added another card. We have Virus Cannon. You tribute any number of monsters except tokens. Your opponent then sends an equal amount of spells from the deck to the graveyard. Or all spells if it's lower. So, yeah, this could really screw up a lot of decks. Especially spell and trap heavy decks. You can get rid of a lot of like spellbook stuff. Not that people really use spellbooks all that much, but it's just an example. It can be really nice in the right situation. And finally, this is also a new card I added to the side deck, Chain Disappearance. When your monster if I can English correctly, sorry about that. And when your opponent summons a monster with 1,000 or less attack, you can banish it. Then your opponent banishes all cards with the same name from their deck. This is, in my opinion, miles better than Mind Crush. I did used to use Mind Crush because of the virus cards, but I was finding that I would find one over the other way too often, so I decided to use this as a side deck card instead. One particular situation that I like to use this card in is when people do things like summon Ash Blossom, kind of as like just because they have nothing else. When they flip summon it, you can activate this card, and they lose all their Ash Blossoms. And other stuff like that. I'm sure you can find your own ways to implement those cards as well. So that is going to do it for this deck profile. I may end up updating it once again. I won't promise this is the last one this time. I am also working on a Skull Servant Lightsworn deck and a rank 10 deck, as well as a Time Lord deck. And I am thinking about building the Chaos Max, the Blue Eyes Chaos Max deck, now that the new support from White Dragon Abyss is out, and I'm really interested in building that. But I will see you guys next time, and stay tuned to my Facebook and my Twitch profile for more updates, more duels, and etc. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you later.